Hi guys, Dean McHenry here from Sentient Archery, and this is lesson 2 in my video lesson series. So in this lesson what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover modern recurve bow styles. So in the first lesson I kind of did touch on this a little bit, but I want to go into more depth, so that's what I'm going to do with this video. So I made some notes, so if I'm looking down, that's obviously what I'm looking at. There are a few things that I want to cover first that are going to kind of make the video make more sense, give it a little bit more context and see how it fits in the bigger picture. And the first thing is to talk about the difference between bow styles and bow types. Now what we mean by bow types would be, for instance, recurve bow or compound bow or long bow. So this is a recurve bow, and fundamentally it's quite different from a compound bow or a long bow. Now bow styles are sort of a subcategory of that. So within recurve there are different bow styles. So you've got like traditional recurve, Bowhunter recurve, Barebow recurve, freestyle recurve, and so that is effectively what this video is going to be about, is talking about those styles and what the fundamental differences are, specifically focusing on the equipment elements there, but I will touch on the aiming methodologies and the differences in terms of regulations or what's permitted in terms of how you actually shoot those bows. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Your bow types are your sort of more umbrella categories. There's going to be few of them, and then your bow styles are your subcategories that will then fit underneath that. Okay, then another thing that's worth mentioning and trying to understand at this point is that you have what we also call shooting categories. Now your category is going to be your group that you compete with. So if you were to enter into a competition, you need to know what your shooting category is, or your competitive category. Now your category will form based around your shooting style, but also you're going to be split by gender and age group. So to give you an example, at the moment if I were to go shoot an IFAA competition, I would enter as adult, male, Bowhunter recurve. So it's those three things together form your category. Okay, now we can go into the actual shooting styles now. So the first thing that I want to sort of say or refer to is that, again, I have a spreadsheet that I've created, a resource. I mentioned it in the previous lesson, and I've done a walkthrough. I'll put that in the links below as well, or I'll put it as a card here somewhere. Basically, that resource is a full and very extensive list of all of the equipment that you might need, and it is categorized in columns of these shooting styles, so you can see kind of based on your shooting style what equipment you might need. So I'm gonna, like I said, reference that, take a look at it, be aware of it. It's just another resource to just help you understand how this all works and how the sport, how you compete and what the different styles are. Okay, so then even in that table, I've split between IFAA and World Archery. So it's worth touching on that now as well. IFAA is the International Field Archery Association, and World Archery is another international federation. So they're probably the two biggest international federations, and as clubs and as a business, and myself personally, those are the federations that I affiliate with, and those are the competitions that I shoot. Now, there are similarities between the shooting styles within these. In fact, there's a lot of overlap, and there are only actually really subtle differences between the shooting styles. So it's worth understanding those two federations and understanding the difference if you want to sort of be chopping and changing between them, how you need to change your equipment. Okay, so the IFAA is a newer federation that, as I understand it, was a breakaway federation at some point, and so a lot of the shooting styles were kind of adopted from the World Archery shooting styles. World Archery is also a new name for the federation. It was FITA, which is, I think, actually French, but World Archery is now what it's called, and so that's how we're going to refer to it, IFAA and World Archery. Okay, now there are other recurve styles that I'm going to mention. I'll get into them a little bit later, but we are fundamentally looking at the modern recurve styles within those two federations. So that's actually 5 different styles, and so I'm going to just go into that right now. Okay, so first things first is that, yeah, I've obviously got a recurve bow in front of me, set up without really any accessories on it. Now, fundamentally between the shooting styles, you can shoot the same bow, your frame can be the same, and really the difference then is going to be the accessories that you put on the bow will then change it between these different shooting styles. So I've got all of those possibilities, all the different stabilizers and sights and accessories, and I'm going to just kind of put them on and show you the differences between those shooting styles now. Okay, so I think the best way for me to do this is to start with pretty much all the accessories on the bow and then slowly strip it away and show you what is not permitted in the other shooting styles. So what I've done is I've got the bow set up now with sights and stabilizers and clickers and all the accessories that you could possibly want to put onto a recurve bow, and this then is going to be showing you what freestyle recurve is in the IFAA and just recurve in world archery. So this is the Olympic style of shooting. So you're using a sight, stabilizers, this is what you're going to see at the Olympics. Now, the reason why I'm doing freestyle and recurve together is that fundamentally they are almost identical in what you can actually use at the competitions. So you can use a full long rod stabilizer. There are no limitations in terms of what kind of stabilization you can use on the bow. So that's why I'm using the long rod as an example. So let me just pop that off here so you can take a look. So there's your long rod. You can also use a V-bar system. I've lent my V-bar system out, so I'm going to just pop a picture in here again so you can see what that'll look like. But effectively it's an extender V-bar unit, side rods that come out the side. You can attach rods below, you can put them up at the top, you can have them sticking out behind the bow. It doesn't matter how you want to stabilize your bow, no restrictions there. Okay, so that's the first fundamental thing. The next thing is that you're using a sight to aim. So I'm going to go into detail with that at another point and do an entire video on how sights work, also what stabilizers are for and how they work for another day, but effectively just what you can and can't use now. So sights for freestyle and recurve in world archery. The next thing that you can use is what we call a clicker. Now again, it's for another video, but a clicker is a draw check. So you put your arrow in behind it, you draw back, clicks against the bow, and you release. You are allowed a clicker in freestyle recurve. Okay, you're then obviously allowed to use modern recurve arrow rests and pressure buttons. So this is the full kit, and that's why they call it freestyle recurve in the IFAA, is because you can pretty much use unlimited as far as the accessories are concerned. Now, there is one difference really in the regulations between world archery recurve and IFAA freestyle recurve, and that is the sight. Now, in the IFAA, you are actually allowed to use a sort of compound type sight that has magnification. Very few people, if anybody, actually uses that in the IFAA, but you are technically allowed to, whereas with world archery you are not allowed any kind of magnification in your sight. Okay, so that is freestyle recurve, and the way you would shoot this is obviously going to be, like I said, with a sight, but it is also worth mentioning at this point how you would hold the string in relation to the arrow. So let me quickly pop an arrow onto the bow here. So again, it goes behind the clicker on the string like that. Now, shooting freestyle recurve, you will almost always shoot a Mediterranean technique. I've never come across anybody that shoots anything else. So no 3 fingers underneath, no string walking. You always have 1 finger above, 2 fingers below, and because of that, you then need to have a finger tab that allows you to do that. So it must have a split in the leather, and they usually then also have a spacer that just parts the fingers so that you don't interfere with the arrow on the string. So that's what that looks like. Okay, all right, freestyle recurve or just recurve in world archery terms. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip it down. The next category down from that would be barebow. Now, barebow is also a world archery and IFAA shooting style, but there are some fundamental differences with that. But first and foremost, no matter what, barebow, you are not allowed to use a sight. So we're going to take that off so that you can clearly see that. You would also need to take off the sight block where the sight is mounted, but it takes too long, so I'm not going to worry about that now, but you are not allowed to have it on the bow. Okay, sight goes off. You are now technically shooting IFAA barebow. Okay, so the IFAA barebow allows the same stabilization. You can use the V-bars, you can use everything, there's no limitation as far as the stabilization is concerned. Okay, you are also allowed a draw check only in IFAA. The thing is though, is the draw check cannot be in the sight window, it cannot be above the arrow because it could be used for aiming. So if you've got a sight here or if you've got something that you can use, that is effectively sighting, not allowed in barebow. So this also needs to come off. So I'm going to quickly pop that off. Okay, so clicker off. Like I said, you can use any kind of stabilization you want, only in IFAA barebow. Okay, but how you actually shoot this style is instead of using your sight, you're going to use a technique called string walking that can also be coupled with face walking. Now what string walking is, we again put another arrow into the bow. String walking is a method that you use to judge your distance based on your position of your fingers on the string in relation to the arrow. So you can now go a little bit lower, a little bit lower, a little bit lower, and as you do that, your arrow will shoot lower with the same aiming reference. You're using the tip of the arrow as an aiming mark, and you're then adjusting your finger position. You can even bring one finger over and above if you wanted to. You can then also couple that with what we call face walking, which means that you could anchor a corner of the mouth, or you could go under the chin, and again, that is going to be dependent on the different distances that you're shooting. So it's a very methodical aiming technique, but you are not allowed to use the sight. Okay, so that's IFAA barebow. And how IFAA barebow differs from World Archery barebow is that World Archery does not permit this kind of stabilization. So their way of making sure that you're staying within that regulation is that they use what we call a barebow ring, which I've just quickly made one out of cardboard here that is 12.5 centimeter diameter across. And how this works is with the bow unbraced, the entire bow has to be able to fit through this ring. So I'll show you that now, but obviously that's going to cut off any kind of long stabilization. So what we have to do then is, if you're wanting to get some kind of stable riser, you can then use what we call barebow weights. So most traditionally a nice big barebow weight where the stabilizer would be, but you can also use other weights. You are not limited to how many of these you can use, as long as they don't stack on top of each other. Individual weights like that. Some risers even have additional place to put barebow weights like this one, sort of inside the riser. I'll put another one over here. And that just gives you mass underneath the bow that helps it behave similar to if you had a long rod stabilizer on. But let me quickly show you how the regulation works for this. So with the bow unbraced, that means that without the string strung on it, you then have to be able to get the entire bow to fit through that ring. So obviously it goes through, pops over those weights, easy enough, and then it goes all the way through and out the other side. Okay, so that is a barebow ring, and only necessary for World Archery barebow, whereas the IFAA does not have that requirement. They allow you to use full stabilization. So that is the major fundamental difference between World Archery barebow, IFAA barebow. Okay, like I said, I'll go into a little bit more detail now. There is also regulation in IFAA that does technically allow you to use a draw check, something similar to a clicker, which you use in freestyle recurve traditionally, but you're not allowed to have it above the arrow. It has to come from below and can't protrude above the arrow. That is a very difficult thing to get right, and I've never actually seen anything in production that does that. I have seen in a World Field Championships somebody that used an old arrow rest to fabricate something that did this. The other thing is you can put a draw check on your limbs, so it is technically allowed, but most people don't bother with it because it is too difficult to get right. So most people actually just shoot without a draw check. Okay, so in World Archery barebow, no draw checks, doesn't matter where it is on the bow, no draw checks are permitted. Okay, all right, now, so I've done the comparison of freestyle and recurve because they're very much the same, and most people can actually take the exact same bow, shoot an IFAA tournament, shoot a World Archery tournament using the same equipment. As far as barebow is concerned, you just have to drop your stabilizers, and if you were using a draw check, get rid of that as well. So you can use the same aiming technique or sighting technique, which is that string walking. And then the other style that we want to go over is Bowhunter recurve. Now Bowhunter recurve doesn't have a World Archery category, only in the IFAA do you have Bowhunter recurve. So what Bowhunter Recurve is more like, kind of like the name says, if you were hunting with a recurve, how would you shoot? Now, first thing that's worth noting is that a hunting recurve would generally be a little bit shorter. The hunting recurves often use a very similar material. They're often made of aluminium or wood or carbon fiber in the limbs, but they are shorter because when you're moving through a field, hunting, trees, things like that, you don't want such a long bow. But we're not talking about hunting, we're talking about target shooting, and so having a longer bow is definitely an advantage. So what it means is that you can use the same bow that you would use for barebow and freestyle, but your accessories and how you shoot the bow are a little bit different. So the first thing is that Bowhunter does actually allow you to use a longer stabilizer, but the maximum length of that stabilizer is 12 inches long. Okay, so here is a Bowhunter stabilizer with a nice weight on the end that will give you a very similar balance to a long rod stabilizer because you have more mass, so that helps to just get a very similar feel in the shot to stabilizers, but that is your limitation. You can also do this with two extenders that fit together. This is the cheapest and easiest way to get a quick Bowhunter stabilizer that's going to balance your bow out nicely, so with a barebow weight on the end. Same barebow weight that you can use for barebow. Okay, just like that. So this is a full 12 inch, this one's about 10, but you get the idea. Okay, the next big difference between Bowhunter and the other shooting styles is that, of course, you're not allowed to use a sight. You're also not allowed to string walk or face walk. So what that means is that, again, let me put an arrow in the bow so I can show you. Once you've chosen your finger position on the string, so either you can shoot this a split finger technique or you can shoot it 3 under, but you cannot change between those or make any adjustments from shot to shot through an entire event. You must stick to the exact same position on the string. Now the reason for that is because when you hunt, you wouldn't use this as a method. You're using a very different aiming technique. You would be shooting instinctively, so you don't make any calibration on the string. So it removes string walking from the picture because it is a more accurate way of aiming and sighting. So it's either 3 under or split finger. The ruling basically says that your index finger must be one side or the other side of the arrow and should be right next to it. Okay, so you're also not allowed to face walk. So that means that once you've chosen your anchor point, whether it be here or lower or wherever you want to do it, maybe closer to the eye, that must stay the same throughout the entire event as well. Again, that's because of how you would hunt with a recurve. So how you hunt with a recurve is pretty much like throwing a ball. It's instinctive. You don't have a real aiming method because you don't really know exactly how far your target might be. So an instinctive method is used, and so you're not actually aiming or using any kind of reference. You're drawing back, hitting your anchor point, figuring out where you need to shoot, and you're shooting like that. Okay, so that is then how you form Bowhunter recurve. You are, however, allowed modern pressure button and a modern arrow rest, the same as the other shooting styles. Just gives you that element of accuracy. That is different to traditional recurve, which I'm going to then now show you as well. Okay. So traditional recurve fundamentally is shot very much the same as Bowhunter recurve. The way you shoot the bow is the same. There's just equipment differences. So let's take a quick look over here. I've got a nice rudimentary traditional bow. First thing you'll notice is that it's exactly the same. It's a recurve bow, pretty much the same in terms of dimensions, but it is now a wooden bow, and so you are limited by the materials that you can use for a traditional recurve. You can use modern materials like steel and aluminium just for your bushings and your limb pockets, but the rest of the bow should ideally be at least mostly wood in the limbs and the riser. Okay, you can use some modern materials in the string as well, but your limitation here is that you are not allowed to use any kind of stabilization, not even a barebow weight, and the big difference is that you're not allowed to use a modern arrow rest or a pressure button. So I'll do a close-up of this so you can see how traditional bows work is that they use the shelf of the riser. Let's sort of try and show you there, the shelf of the riser for the arrow to sit on. Then what they'll do is they'll put a synthetic or otherwise animal hair pad over here with a strike plate that's usually made of leather on the other side, and the arrow sits inside that position, and that makes it a little bit less accurate and harder to shoot. And so that again is one of the big differences between traditional recurve and say Bowhunter recurve or the other shooting styles. Okay, the other difference, now we're talking about arrows, is that with traditional recurve you can use the same carbon fiber arrows, you can use the same modern points and nocks, but your fletchers have to be feathers. And the reason for that is because with that shelf strike plate system, the arrow often makes contact with the bow, so that the feather, I'll do another close-up of this as well, actually folds as it goes through, and that is not obviously going to then damage the fletch as much as it would if it was a proper plastic fletch that's a lot stiffer. But yeah, it's just a regulation because that's how you would shoot traditionally with an arrow. They do allow you to use the modern materials for the other stuff as well. I think that's mostly for a safety thing because wooden arrows often break. If your back of your arrow is made from also a wooden nock, that also can break, and so there are injury risks. So generally that's why I think they allow you to use more modern materials now. Okay, as far as arrows are concerned, for the other shooting styles, you can shoot the same modern equipment with plastic vanes, spin wings, the works. You can shoot whatever you want for the other modern shooting styles or modern recurve styles. The only difference is that when you get into the IFAA freestyle recurve is that you can use different length arrows, you can use different colors, different size fletchers from arrow to arrow. Not that anybody really does, but it is a regulation. Whereas when you look at your Bowhunter recurve and your Barebow recurve, you're not allowed to have variance in the arrows. All the arrows need to be exactly the same in your entire set. But to be honest, I've never seen anybody actually use different length arrows or different sizes effectively for different distances and for performance purposes. So not really a regulation you need to worry about. Okay, so something else that is worth noting at this point is just the differences in terms of finger tabs for the different shooting styles. I've kind of touched on it, but I just want to clarify it. So if your shooting style requires you to shoot a split finger technique, one finger above and two below, your finger tab needs to also be split fingered. So it means that there needs to be a parting in the leather. Often that is then coupled with a spacer. So I'm going to just do a quick close-up of the differences between these so you can see it. And then if you're going to be shooting 3 under at any point, whether that is staying 3 under or actually string walking, you would then use what is called a Barebow tab, which is a single piece of leather, often with little markings on it for your string walking. As far as Bowhunter is concerned, if you were to use this finger tab, you wouldn't use those markings and you would stay in the same position, but no split in the leather is required. Okay, so it's just worth noting that whatever shooting style you go for, your finger tab may not necessarily be interchangeable between the shooting styles. So you need to either have 2 if you want to chop and change, otherwise you need to just know which one is correct for your shooting style. Also, for traditional, it is one of the regulations is that you must shoot a split finger technique. So therefore, if you're using a tab, you would need again similar tab to an Olympic style tab with a spacer and that gap in the leather. You can also use other techniques. You could use a glove for traditional recurve, but I would always recommend just using a tab. It's just a more effective way of releasing the string nice and clean. Okay, so I think I've pretty much covered everything, and I really think that should help give you a good idea of what the different bow styles are. So if you're not sure about which category you shoot in or which one you want to shoot in, that should help. What I do want to also just mention though is that IFAA and World Archery obviously have these regulations available for anybody who wants to go and take a look at them. The IFAA specifically has created some really nice tables and diagrams that really show you all the different shooting styles. Those shooting styles go right across from historical bows to long bows, recurves, compounds, everything. So don't get too confused there. And then each of those individual recurve styles has their own diagram showing you what you can and can't use on those bows. As far as the actual equipment is concerned, I will definitely put the links directly to that. It's on their website. I'll put those links in the description below so you can go and check them out. World Archery, as far as I know, hasn't created a resource or diagram quite like that, but the rulings are in their rule book, so I'm going to just put that there as well. So if you want to go and dig and try and figure out all the nitty-gritty, it's there. Obviously I couldn't cover everything. There are some sort of smaller more specific regulations about these shooting styles that when you really start competing you might need to start understanding, but for the most part I've covered everything that's really important, so this is going to get you well on your way. Obviously, if you have any questions, if anything didn't make sense, please guys, this is for you. Put those questions, comments, anything in the comments below. Email me, WhatsApp me. I will try and answer the best I can. And again, if you have any specific topics that you'd like me to cover, let me know. I'll put them in the list and hopefully I can get to that soon as well. Thank you so much, guys. Nice long one, but I think it was important and it's something that I've actually wanted to do for quite some time. So hope it's helpful. Thanks for listening or watching up until this point. Please subscribe, like, share, and yeah, I'll check you next week.